But this is the time to be accumulating actually both gold and silver, but for very different reasons. So let's take a look at that. And I want to start with the gold and silver ratio that everybody talks about all the time. And of course, historically, you'll see that ratio, the price of gold and the price of silver, grow more narrow. Maybe 15 to 1, 16 to 1, 19 to 1, right? And we know that right now it's very, very high, somewhere around 70 to 1. And it was certainly even higher than that. Oops, I didn't grab my pointer. You know, right up here when we were above 110 to 1, it was close to 120 to 1. So that gap is growing more narrow. That is not a surprise going into a currency reset. That is typically what does happen. But people have, you know, let's see how to say this. People have taken this little bit of trading, just like those that are watching the stock market go up or the cryptocurrencies go up in nominal terms, in terms of fiat dollars, and going, oh, well, that's where I want to be. Maybe it is and maybe it isn't. You can't just take any of this at face value. You have to dig a little bit deeper. And all you guys know, I have both, but they perform very different functions for me. So let's just keep going on and we'll talk about that as we go. And, you know, I've been talking about Venezuela. Here we go one more time, because this is something that's happening right away. But in 2018 was the first currency reset in Venezuela. And silver certainly performed quite well, as did gold. However, let's take a look at that. So silver went up substantially, let's see, hundreds, thousands, millions, so almost 3.5 million%. That's pretty good. Who's going to complain about that in terms of the Bolivar? But here's how gold performed. This is the first reset. They recently had the second reset. We're going to look at that next. I really could not find a good comprehensive graph that would give me both of these, because remember, we went from the Bolivar to the Bolivar Forte. I mean, the Bolivar's name is going to be in there, but they'll change something else, just like that's what they do. So people don't think that anything has changed. I mean, it's crazy because everybody knows that. But certainly in terms of the currency, gold outperforms silver at a pretty significant level. Why? Because gold is the primary currency metal. What do the central banks hold in reserve? They hold gold. So that at the end of the day, when they reset that currency against it, they reset it against gold. Not Bitcoin, not Apple stock, not a piece of real estate, and not against silver. But silver is a secondary monetary metal, so you got to have it. And when you're thinking about that gold-silver ratio, I want you to think about this. The Bolivar has more value as a napkin for an empanada than it does for you to be able to purchase goods and services. This is really all about purchasing power. That's what it's all about. We want to protect the wealth that we've accumulated. I mean, I have cash, but I don't really accumulate any of those other Wall Street products because, hey, I was a stockbroker. I understand this crap, and so I don't own any of that at this juncture. That has not always been true. That will not always be true likely in the future. But we can see during this first reset, they really didn't change anything, but gold outperformed silver by what, 1,000,000%? That's pretty good. Now, interestingly enough, since that first reset in 2017, of course they didn't change behavior. You just change how you account for that behavior. Don't change the behavior itself, but people won't realize that. So the hyperinflation continued. Then what did he do? well, now they're going to digitalize the entire economy. So Venezuelans that are bound, that only have access to the Bolivar, they are in abject poverty. Let's face it, they're in abject poverty. But also all confidence in the currency is lost. That's really ultimately what creates that hyperinflationary event, is when that confidence is lost. We've talked about it a million times, but that's because it's simply true. And so, again, 3 years later, not even 3 years later, they have lopped off zeros and reset the currency. And so we had the silver response, did pretty well, and we had the gold response, did equally as well. Except in the prior, let me just go back to that. Let's go back to that for just a second. Gold outperformed silver by 1,000,000%. And they're not done yet. The reset is not done yet because the behavior has not come to conclusion yet. I don't know why, but globally on average, we will likely see 3 of these before the entire economy is reduced to a full barter economy. That's why silver is important, is for your day-to-day barterability. So you can buy that pint of strawberries. You can put a tank of gas in your car. But how easy do you think it would be to buy a building with that? You need an awful lot of them in order to buy a building. That's why I use gold for my opportunity positioning as well as wealth preservation. You need both, but they both have different functions. And you have to really ask yourself, what do you want to be holding into a currency reset? For me, it is the mostly, I have both, I want both, you need both. But you need this to sustain your standard of living. You need this to grow your wealth base and to protect all of those fiat dollars that you might not be able to move out of your 401k or out of your IRA or your 403b or your pension plan. And I hope you are not counting on those instruments to see you through this, because anything that you can only convert into, in this country, dollars, well, last time I checked, 1 trillion times 0 is 0. If the dollar has no purchasing power, just like the bolivars, if they have no purchasing power, you can have a gazillion of them, and it's not going to matter. So let me use another really well-known example to show you what I'm talking about with that gold and silver ratio. And Weimar Germany is not the worst case of hyperinflation, but it is the most well-known. And you can see that the gold and silver ratio, even though there were times when it went up, it pretty much stayed even until the real reset was occurring. And then there was a huge jump and a huge difference between the two. So if you're sitting in gold and silver, I really say, yay, thank goodness. But I would personally, you got to do what you're comfortable with. But personally, I own more gold than I do silver, because silver is about sustaining my standard of living. Gold is about protecting the wealth I have and being in a position to take advantage of the opportunities that lie ahead of us. And just as another example, because we all know that food becomes the biggest issue for people during these transitions. And even if you stop and think about what happened in March of last year, a year ago, when all the grocery store shelves went bare, well, toilet paper is also a really important thing to have on hand. And as you probably saw, you can also barter with that. But the difference between silver and, say, toilet paper or berries or any kind of food stuff is that food stuff has a shelf life, whereas silver does not have a shelf life. I mean, I don't know how old this is, but, you know, I picked this up at a yard sale, God knows how many years ago. You know, probably for nothing, to be perfectly honest with you, because who wants to polish silver? Well, I don't have a problem with that, so I was happy to buy it. But I do want you to keep in mind, even when you look, can we go back to that slide? If you look at the German mark, you know, at one point, these were all 5 marks. The bill, the silver coin, and the gold mark. This is the one that really, it's the gold that ends up outperforming. The silver will buy you bread, but I want to go back to that so you can look at this one more time. And keep in mind, all of these charts and the links and everything you will be able to find on the blog along with a written blog on it. But that gold-silver ratio maintains until it doesn't. Just like the stock markets stay up until they don't. So I really wanted to clarify that. That's why, that's part of the strategy. I mean, you know, I've studied currency life cycles since 1987. And what is it that we always talk about on this channel? And if you're new to it, you'll get familiar with it as well. There are repeatable patterns that happen every time. So I cannot guarantee tomorrow because that's way beyond my control.